Sometimes DMing is really easy. You just give your players a very open-ended but sort of difficult problem to solve, and then you sit back and you watch them try to solve it. When last we left our heroes. It's been a while since I've gotten to do that. Hey everybody, it's Nick. So we're picking up session 3 from my players in our current D&D campaign, the Agents of the Emperor, and they are in the city of Bolero trying to find a way to get the city to surrender before Ares and his army gets there. So their goal is just trying to find a way to undermine the city's resolve and get it to surrender as soon as they can, and that way the army can just waltz right in. And they've got their plan currently is to work with this mining family to replace the governor, and they will get rid of the governor however possible, and then the new governor will surrender to Ares. That's the goal anyways, and so what the players have to do to prove themselves to this mining corporation is go clear out a mine where some of the miners have been gone missing. They found a vein of mithril, but no miners have come back and able to claim it and everything. So they go down there and try to clear out the problem. Players get to explore a little bit, and they find a bunch of dead miners. And by the way, we're talking about like miners, not miners, and they're a bunch of dead miners, and they're trying to figure out what happened to this. There's no, incisions or cuts or blood or any obvious signs of ways in which they died, and then this voice calls out to them from the other end of the cavern and tells them to leave its home and all that. And then Sorrel, played by Walter, responds and is like, hey, what are you doing here? Who are you? And why are you killing people? And this entity is like, you should know that, Child of Shadow. And he's like, Child of Shadow? Hang on a second. This sounds like this thing knows me, and I don't know it, so what's going on here? But the players very quickly provoke this entity, and they have to fight a purple shadow dragon. Such a cool encounter. Really neat. And then, of course, as they start to fight the shadow dragon, the shadows from the dead bodies rise, and now they're fighting all these things. And very quickly, the players are torn. Do they attack it? Do they retreat? Like, how do they interact with the situation? Really tense setup. So the fight goes on a little bit, but the shadow dragon's pretty nasty and gets off a couple of good breaths. It recharges its breath weapon a couple of times, and Varys drops to 0, which Shadow Dragon dropping something to 0 means they die, and a shadow is raised in their place. So in the middle of all this, Sorrel says, hang on, stop. You know who I am. Let's you and I parlay a little bit. Let's talk. Everybody else leaves, and it's just you and me, and we'll talk. And the Shadow Dragon is interested in this idea and allows everyone else to go, and Sorrel stays behind and they have a conversation. And so, the players retreat back around the corner to a different spot in the tunnel. They revivify Varys, so he was dead. He is now no longer. And then I get up with Walter and we go to another room. And we sit down and we have the conversation between him and the Shadow Dragon. I do this on purpose so that nobody else knows what's going on. They wouldn't have had any conversation with, they wouldn't be able to overhear what's happening in the conversation. And so I wanted to take this time to sort of be extra dramatic and let the player relay to them whatever information he remembers. I'm becoming much more open to the idea of passing secret notes where only one player knows, or taking a player out of a room to do things like that. I used to be very like, oh no, what about the other players? That's so weird for them. Nah, they had things to talk about. They could plan and discuss things, but also it's playing for them too. They get the suspense and the nerves of not knowing what's happening and then getting to interrogate the player when they come back. And I think that's really cool. So we had this whole conversation. None of the players know what happened, but Sorrel said, hey, who are you and why do you seem to know who I am? And the Shadow Dragon's very mysterious about all this and is like, hey, we serve the same master. And, well, who is that master? And the Shadow Dragon says the name Karshimus, which Sorrel has no idea who that is, and neither does Walter. And so I was trying to figure out what's going on, and the Shadow Dragon seems to think that Sorrel is the one who will light the beacon or clear the way for Karshimus, something like that, and can't really figure out what the deal is. But Sorrel says, hey, if we're working for the same person, it's not good for you to be known that you're here, right? Multiple people have come in. They already know you're a problem. They sent us down to come and deal with you. They're going to send other groups down. Why don't you leave until Karshimis comes back, or until Karshimis tells you to go somewhere else? Like, why don't you leave this place? And that would be doing me a solid. That would help me out. And I think we're on the same team. It was really cool. Walter just sort of went with it for a lot of the stuff and role-played in the moment very well. And so that was what they agreed to. The Shadow Dragon retreated to an unknown location, and Sorel and his team were, I guess, victorious. They did manage to clear out the problem in the mines. There was a bunch of mithril in there. And Varys got to die, and he was trying to roleplay coming back from being dead, and that was really interesting as well. So really cool combat encounter to get things started. Probably a little too hard, but also just in terms of CR and everything, I lowered it down a little bit from the Shadow Dragon that you find in the Monster Manual, but still a pretty tough fight. And so I'm pretty in favor of giving players really hard fights because it forces them to either use their resources or come up with clever ways around it, which they did. I also don't run 6 to 8 combat encounters per adventuring day, like the Dungeon Master's Guide sort of says everything is allotted for, and so I usually run harder fights, but fewer of them per adventuring day, and this was an example of that. Sometimes players die, that happens. Luckily, they managed to save the day. They've got 2 clerics with Revivify, both of them. They've got some diamonds, they've got healing. I'm really not concerned about players dying in this campaign. I'm going to throw a lot of crazy stuff at them, and it'll be up to them to stay alive. So after this conversation between Sorel and the Shadow Dragon, Sorel comes out and says, hey guys, solve the problem, situation normal, the Shadow Dragon is going to leave, find a new place, we're okay, let's go. And then Wilhelm, played by Hunter, casts Detect Thoughts on Sorel. And at this point in time, I sort of pause everything and say, okay, cool, it doesn't have to make a save or anything like that to get surface level thoughts. And I said, okay, hang on a second. This is getting close to sort of like PvP territory, using spells and abilities against other players. I'm not going to immediately shut it down, but generally I stray away from that. So here's what I'm going to say. Hunter, what are you after? What are you trying to understand? And Sorel, I'm going to let the player, Walter, decide how much Wilhelm learns from this spell. I'm not going to tell him because I want 100% of the agency to be in the hands of the player. I'm fine with a player using something like Detect Thoughts, but on another PC, but I don't want them to feel like, well, I get to do whatever I want because I cast the spell and I get to know everything and I get to spoil your backstory and I get to find out all your secrets, and no, that's not what we're here to do. So I want to give all of the power in this situation to Walter to describe as much or as little or as vague or as specific of information as Wilhelm receives from that. Everybody at the table was super cool with that. Hunter clarified and was like, I don't want to know any surprises or secrets or anything like that. I'm just trying to make sure he's still him. Like the Shadow Dragon didn't try to possess him or anything weird like that. I just want to make sure he is still him. And Walter was like, okay, cool, now I understand what you're kind of going for. And he shared some phrases and imagery and sort of broken up ways that would definitely let Hunter know that that Walter was still himself, but maybe not all of the details of everything that he was thinking about at that moment. Just sort of an example and some experience with players using skills and abilities against each other. I'm generally not wild about it, but in this instance, it worked out okay. Just helped being able to communicate and saying, okay, what are you trying to get out of this? And then, awesome, now that you know that, what are you going to tell the group out loud about all of this? What's gonna come of this? What is he gonna understand? I'm giving all of the power to this player to make their own decisions. I think that's really important in those types of things, is not mind controlling a player and allowing them to have some agency in how much they are mind controlled, if that makes sense. Or mind read, you get what I'm saying. So then the players continue to explore Bolero, gather information, interact with some people, some factions. They talk to the Huthan mining family, and who tells them, yep, good job, I'm impressed at your work, and if you can force the governor into early retirement, then we'll be able to establish someone in their place who will surrender the city to Ares. Then afterwards, Varys goes out and is trying to gather some more information about some things and learn more about the city and things like that. He goes off by himself, and the way that he is doing it and the people he's interacting with, it's sort of that, like, it's a shady rogue type thing to do, and he is a rogue. And so I have somebody walk up to him and be like, oh, it's nice to see a familiar face here in this town. And I tell the player, Charlie, you have no idea who this individual is. And Charlie sort of reciprocates back, oh yeah, a familiar face in these strange lands. And they start to go back and forth a little bit, and I just tell Charlie outright, this is somebody you recognize. It took you a couple of phrases to recognize it, but now you recognize this person is using thieves' cant. It's a signal, it's a code embedded in normal things that they're saying. It's not like a language all to itself, but there's certain phrases and key words in there that he's able to use. And this is stolen from Dale Kingsmill. She had a fantastic video a long time ago about thieves' cant, and I never really got a chance to use it until now. And I thought it was a really neat chance to deploy it, and the player thought it was super cool. The player was, I never gave the player the code or anything. I never told them what all the signals meant. I just sort of said, hey, this is thieves' cant, and then a couple of times I would say, okay, he says this back to you, and what he means is this. And then I just kind of kept going with the conversation, and it was awesome watching Charlie roleplay thieves' cant back. He had never experienced this. I never told him what the code was or anything like that, and he sort of was trying to find ways to, how would I communicate to somebody who is a thief rogue person and knows I am as well? How would I try to talk to them in a public situation without other people figuring out what we're talking about? And it was neat trying to watch him formulate thieves' cant. I thought it was a really cool little thing to use, and I really plan on using it a lot more. I thought it was really neat. I encourage you to use it in this way as well. I feel like thieves' cant doesn't get used all the time. I think this might be the first time ever that I've actually used thieves' cant as a DM, and I thought it was pretty neat. So that worked out for me. Maybe it'll work out for you. Next, Walter is trying to train his wolf, Una, that he sort of tamed a little bit, and he's trying to figure out, you know, how can I get this wolf to follow some commands and stuff. And so he goes out and he finds there's a potion shop somewhere, and somebody has made a potion of Speak with Animals. And it's just the first level spell, Speak with Animals, works for 10 minutes, no big deal. So he gets that and takes it, and he gives this long list of commands to his wolf, Una, and they have a sort of a conversation back and forth. That was really fun, getting to roleplay a really lovable, big, aggressive dog. But he has this list of like 15 commands. It's like, okay, do this. If I say this, do this. If I say this, do this. If I say this, do this. And I was like, okay, she's enthusiastically responding, but she's still a wolf. Her intelligence still is what it is. Just because you can understand her and speak to her and vice versa doesn't mean she'll understand all of this. So he had this whole long list. I said, roll 2d4 or something. And whatever the total number was that he was going to get was the number of tricks or signals that she would remember and learn from this time. And it was such a high number because they had already been working together previously, and he was able to speak to her and say, if you hear me say this, do this. So I think she learned like 4 tricks that she's able to do. Things like go and retrieve a thing, like if it's an unconscious body, drag them as far as you can, attack someone, stay near me, run away, things like that. That he was able to teach his wolf, Una. So really cool getting to see a player develop and actually train an animal companion. This is, I think, how animal companions should function practically in a game, where you have a player go and do a thing to get an animal companion and then spend time training and working with them to get a companion that will be able to respond to commands and actions and things like that. I don't love the way that the Beastmaster class is set up, because I think anyone should be able to do these things that the Beastmaster has it baked in as their class. I think anyone should be able to go out and just tame a beast and work with them. If you spend some time, some downtime, a couple of days or weeks of planning, depending on what you do and how you roll and things like that, they could learn a couple of tricks and traits, and I think that's a really neat way to do it. So that is currently happening with Walter and his wolf, Una. Next, the easy part for me as a DM. I sat back and just said, okay, now, what are you doing? And they sat there and role-played them trying to figure out how they're going to assassinate the governor. And they talked a little bit about, okay, well, maybe we approach them with a deal. Well, she's probably not going to respond well to a deal, and she'll know who we are after we talk to her, so we can't do that, so we have to try, actually we got to kill her. So what I do during these planning phases is very similar to a series, a TV series back in the late 80s called Ethics in America, something Matt Colville has talked about before, and basically they have this panel of really famous and important people in their field. They get, attorney generals and Supreme Court justices and high-level doctors in their field for various ethical issues, and there's a moderator, and the moderator will ask people a question, they'll debate it back and forth about their positions about various things, and in the middle of it, right as they're starting to get to sort of a resolved point of view, the moderator will change the condition on them and say, well, okay, what if it was this situation? So you have somebody who cheated to take an entrance exam to get into college, but they really needed to because, they're too poor, their grades aren't good, or whatever to get into college, they need to do well on this exam, so they cheated. How would you interact with this person? What advice would you give this young person? Okay, let's say they were planning on cheating but hadn't taken the exam yet. Now what would you do? Okay, let's say this person is your child. Now how would you interact with them? Let's say they're a minority who has different experiences and situations. How would you react to them? So constantly they're debating, they're talking, they're figuring it out, and they come this close to a resolution, and then the moderator changes the situation. And so that's what I did with the players. They're planning this assassination. We have this idea. What if we do this? What if we do that? And then I'll just throw out there, hey, your guys are pretty smart. You would know that there are things that exist like magical security measures. Oh, shoot, right, magic. Okay, hang on. How would we, what kind of spells are there that we could bypass, and how would we do that? And also in this, and let's talk to somebody and figure out more about the mayor. Okay, cool. The mayor is probably, she usually spends her evenings at home with her family. Oh, shoot, she's got a family. Right, of course she does. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. What are we going to do here? What are we going to do about this? We're spending a long time talking about it. Some guards knock on your door. Uh-oh, guards are here. Hang on a second. Hey, guards, how's it going? Hey, just want to let you know, nobody's going to be able to leave the city after a little while. We need people to stay and defend the walls. Oh, shoot. Okay, so the guards are making people stay and not allowed to leave. Okay, great. What's that? Maybe we can stir up the city against them? People won't like that. So basically, just as soon as they get close to an idea, tweaking it a little bit, reminding them of information they already know, or adding in some, hey, what about this? Just to keep them on their toes and make sure they don't get really dead set on a plan that I know can't work. And it's information that the players would know. I usually don't add information. I just say, hey, make sure you think about this. And the players go, oh, right, we hadn't thought about that. Okay. Hey, there's a bunch of really good aligned people who worship good aligned deities. And you're planning an assassination without ever having talked to a person? I wonder how your gods are going to feel about that. And just sit back and let it go and watch the players struggle with that and try to figure out how they can process it. Very interesting planning process for me. If it feels like they are stuck around a singular idea, I'll interrupt it with something like Orcs Attack, a la Matt Colville. But generally, I let them go. I let them plan. I let them think of things because I think that's a big part of D&D is planning and strategizing. And I like watching these players try to figure out how to solve these really open-ended problems. So that was the video for today, actually. Not nearly as long as last week, but I wanted to give the players a cool combat, and they turned it into a really cool role-playing experience, and then had some other role-playing bits laced in there, and then planning and preparation. So next week, they're going to try to figure out how to assassinate a governor. Their current plan is to wait until she's at a public appearance, which she's going to have one, and then cast invisibility on the rogue, and spider climb on the rogue, and the rogue is going to run up there on top of the walls where she's going to be and slit her throat, throw her body over the edge, and the players will be in the crowd gathered and destroy her body so it can't be resurrected, and they'll all scatter. That is the plan. That came about because I told my players a little bit of a ruling that I have on how damage works. I just was making conversation at the beginning of the session as we were sort of milling about and just said, hey, this is what hit points represent. They don't represent how many times can you get stabbed. They represent what your stamina, agility, your ability to stay on your feet, luck, things like that to prevent a lethal blow. But if somebody is standing in front of you, completely defenseless, they don't try to defend themselves, you have a sword to their chest and stab them, you don't roll for damage, they die. And, you know, if you walk up to somebody and there's a guard and you could just get behind him and slit his throat, he would just die. And the player's like, whoa, you can just do that? I was like, well, you'd have to pass stealth checks, and then as soon as you tried to reach around the guard's neck, he'd get an athletics check to fight you off, and maybe he wouldn't, you know, right away, and then there would be combat from there. But yeah, if you were successful in several checks, sure, if they're not a really important named bad guy kind of a thing, yeah, you could definitely just execute someone like that, unless it's, you know, a really powerful monster or whatever. So that's their plan, is to try to get behind and stealth assassinate the governor. And I think it's going to be really interesting because the governor's a pretty powerful warrior. To be a governor here, you have to be someone of might and renown. That is what this culture of this city sort of respects. And so they were a general in the military previously. They know their stuff. So it's going to be interesting seeing the player try to execute someone like that. It'll be neat. Maybe that's not how you interact with executions and damage and things like that, but that's how I deal with it. Makes sense to me. If you can get behind someone, you have a dagger, you slit their throat, they would just die, right? That's how I rule it anyway. Let me know in the comments what you think about that. How would you handle that? You know, my sort of version is they have to sneak up on them with stealth, and they have to beat an athletics check to grapple them so that they can execute, but after that, they would just be able to slice their throat. So that is the current plan, and I'm trying to think through now, what happens if they succeed, what happens if they fail, and then what happens when Ares and his military gets here. I think that will happen next session, that one way or another, the military will get here, and there will be some sort of a battle, and then things will unfold from there. Super looking forward to it. Thank you all for following along. Let me know if you have any feedback in the comments, any ideas that you have, any ways that you might have handled some of the situations that we dealt with this week, or ways you think I should deal with situations next week. But thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.